Hey, I'm Tommy Ellison, and this is Senior Moments. I can't tell you what I had for breakfast this morning, but I remember every detail of that time I came this close to being suspended my senior year in high school, just 3 weeks before graduation. So stick around. This is proof that some things from a misspent youth just don't fade away. Let's go. Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Tommy Ellison. Welcome to Senior Moments. I appreciate you listening in if you're here live, or otherwise if you're on the replay. Certainly appreciate you being a part of our afternoon podcast on Senior Moments. And the title for this particular episode is probably something that maybe you've heard yourself say to other folks in your family, and that is, don't lie to mama. Don't lie to mama. And that's good advice for those of you who have not heard that before. You know, I grew up in Fairfield, Alabama. Those of you who don't know me, that's probably not all that germane to the subject here. But those of you who do know me and have known me for a while know that I grew up in Fairfield. But I actually attended St. Anthony's Catholic School from kindergarten to 8th grade. And then I became a pupil there at the Fairfield Junior High, since it was about, 4 blocks from my house there in Fairfield. And I didn't want to get up and ride the bus at 6:30 in the morning to go to John Carroll, which was all the way across town. So the other question might come up from you is, why St. Anthony's? And St. Anthony's was in Inslee, Alabama, which was a part of Birmingham adjacent to Fairfield. And, well, to quote Hank Williams Jr., I went to St. Anthony's because it was a family tradition. You see, my mom, she had 9 siblings. She was one of 10 kids in all. And all of them were raised in the Catholic Church, and all attended parochial school. And, you know, when you go to parochial school, in many instances, every year you're taught by nuns. You certainly have the priests visiting from time to time in your classrooms. And so it was a heavy-duty religious education, as you might imagine, and perhaps you know if you went to parochial school. But when you go to parochial school, of course, you learn about not only the Catholic Church, but also about Catholic traditions. And that's kind of what we're going to be talking a little bit about today. And I guess it's pretty much the same in all denominations. I mean, if you were a Baptist, you learn not to dance or drink alcohol or smoke cigarettes. But in the Catholic Church, you could do all three as long as you went to confession and you tried to repent, which trying to repent meant you didn't want to make a fool of yourself when the church had bingo night or spring festivals. But the church had another tradition, and that's the one I want to kind of focus on because, well, it wasn't a tradition so much as a rule. I mean, it wasn't a tradition. It was a hard and fast rule during the time that I was in grammar school. And to describe it in one sentence, 4 words, no meat on Friday. And if you grew up in parochial school like me, you know, there were all sorts of rules that we learned. I mean, you would have thought that no meat on Friday and making sure you were wearing your uniform, school uniform, every day to school, were like amendments to the 10 Commandments, something that kind of happened between the time of Moses and the first century when the Catholic Church came into prominence. But they were dead serious about these rules. And, well, Friday meant no meat. You couldn't eat it. It was a Catholic tradition. And I never really quite understood it, to be honest with you. I mean, I can remember on a few occasions, being a kid with half a brain, I would grab a slice of bologna out of the refrigerator and eat it, and then suddenly realize, it was Friday. Oh, well, another sin to add to my list when I went to confession on Saturday afternoon. I would say, bless me, Father, for I've sinned. I ate a piece of bologna last Friday, and little Susie Campbell wore patent leather shoes and a frilly dress to church last Sunday, and, well, I peaked. And those that know. But anyway, I don't think I was the only one who wondered about, the no meat rule on Friday. Even George Carlin, you remember him, the comedian, kind of a spicy comedian, if you recall. He had on one of his albums, he asked the question, and he wondered about, the meat rule, because, the Pope abolished the no meat rule, probably when I was about 12 or 13 years old. I don't remember the exact time, but he did away with it. Okay, think about it. Hundreds of years, people were abstaining from meat, and suddenly this Pope pops up and abolishes the rule. Well, and this was Carlin's question. What happened to all those people that, went to hell on a meat wrap? What happened to them? Were they retried and, went on to heaven? And, well, as the priest would say during our Q&A sessions, some days he would, get a question that he, kind of questions that your kid asks. The kid asked, it was like, can God make a rock so big that even he can't lift it? And the priest would typically say, well, it's a mystery of faith, and we'll leave it at that. So, well, now you know the backstory when I tell you about the school lunches at parochial school, because at St. Anthony's, the Friday lunch menu every week, every month, was fish sticks, soggy French fries, and a cornbread square, and white milk in the little white milk cartons. You remember those? No chocolate milk. We didn't have that luxury. I don't know if it cost more or they just thought we were better off drinking white milk. And not just on occasion, but every Friday, the menu was the same. Now, don't get me wrong. I actually like fish sticks, especially with ketchup. Everything's better with ketchup, right? And some kids in the lunchroom even put ketchup on those big white butter beans they served about every other day, it seemed like. And I hated those. I hated those white butter beans. Even at school, we had to eat everything on our plate. It was an enforced rule by the nuns. When we got finished eating, we would walk over to where we would put the trays in the window for the dishwasher to do their thing. And Sister Mary Battleship would be standing there, and she was pretty much in an evil mood most times. And she would shake our empty milk cartons to make sure we weren't hiding contraband in there, like white butter beans, in the carton, in order to pass inspection as we turned in our trays. And I got busted several times and eventually figured out that if I wore my jacket to lunch, I could put the butter beans or even the cornbread squares that I was not really a big fan of in my pocket of my jacket. But that's another story. And this isn't a story about butter beans or cornbread squares. So we'll save that for another day. But here's the deal. We're at lunch having fish sticks. God, one of my favorites. They were really good. I'm not sure where they came from. Don't even know what kind of fish it was. But fast forward now 5 hours on that Friday day to Friday night, and of course at home. And that meant we were going to eat Mom's salmon croquettes. And don't ask me why, but she loved salmon croquettes. And just like in parochial school, they had French fries every day for lunch, every Friday night that I can remember. we had salmon croquettes. I hated them. I mean, it was like they tell me it had like actually salmon, meat mixed in, but they had all these other little mystery bits going on, strange texture, little red and green things that I had no idea what they were. And of course, most of all, it was that awful smell, of salmon cooking in the skillets there at our house. And Friday night at our house, it would remind you of having your face strapped to an exhaust fan of a fish market on a hot summer day. I mean, it smelled up the entire house. Well, this particular night, it was no different. We were having salmon croquettes. And, thinking about this story 65 years later, it dawned on me that my dad was never home on Friday night for dinner. Apparently he was, working late, upholding the law. He was, out, taking his chances patrolling the streets of Jefferson County. He was a deputy sheriff. He busting up moonshine stills or monitoring gambling activity at Boutwell Auditorium during the Friday night wrestling matches. But I don't think he ever actually made it home to eat the salmon croquettes every Friday night like Mom and I did. And this particular Friday night that I'm reminiscing about, I kind of sat staring at the croquettes that remained on my plate. And I kind of concocted a plan, living with a lawman like my dad and watching multiple episodes of Gunsmoke and Perry Mason. I learned that you can't get away with crime if you have the evidence on your person or in the vicinity of the crime scene. And I had made up my mind this night I was not going to eat the salmon croquettes. I mean, I had even taken and broken it up into multiple small bite-sized chunks, to kind of make it look like I was eating part of it. But, it was kind of like some form of Gestalt theory croquette. I mean, it seemed like the sum of the parts were greater than the whole. And my mom was never fooled by that. And she looked at me and she said, "Eat your salmon croquettes." Now, Mom, she had finished her meal. And of course, I think she got a little tired of nagging me about eating everything on my plate. And that's when she left the room. Now, I don't know what she was doing. Maybe she was brushing her teeth and gargling to get the foul stench of salmon croquettes out of her mouth. Who knows? So while she was elsewhere, I executed my plan. I got up from the table. I walked across the room to a window over the sink. I raised it up and I dumped my leftover croquettes into the flower bed outside below the window. Now, when Mom came back in, she asked me if I had eaten it. And of course, I lied. And that's when she looked at me with what I would call defiant eyes that I had seen before multiple times. And she said, "Come over here and let me smell your breath." I was busted. No salmon croquette breath. I realized I should have taken one bite, just to cover my tracks. But, as they say on the Burma shave signs on the highway, the evil plans of mice and men shall often go astray. Well, what did she do? She made me go outside, retrieve the bits and pieces from the flower bed, bring it back into the kitchen, sit down at the table, and eat it. Dirt, grass, decaying bug parts, pieces of salmon croquette, all of it. I mean, when you're out there with a fork or a spoon trying to figure out what's fish and what's not, well, the punishment was served. Lesson learned. And here's my advice, guys. Never lie to mom. Second rule, don't toss your food out the window unless you've got an alibi. And I'll stop here for the benefit of those of you who are feeling a bit queasy, but it's a true story, and I'm not proud of it, but I appreciate you joining me for this week's Senior Moments. We do have a comment here. Let's see, who is Lewis? Lewis Kelly says, we had fish sticks on Fridays in public school. I loved it because I like fish. I was done for the Catholic students. Oh, it was done for the Catholic students. Well, that was nice, but I was fine with it. But I wonder, did you like salmon croquettes, Lewis? I know I certainly didn't. Well, listen, thanks for joining Senior Moments. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you'll join me next week. And be sure and listen to what this handsome guy is coming up next has to say about making sure you subscribe and hit the like button and do all those things that you're supposed to do when you watch YouTube. And have a great evening. And thanks for joining me. Take care. Well, hey, thanks for spending a few minutes with me on Senior Moments. If you enjoyed the ride, be sure and tap that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. I'll be back soon with more stories from a misspent youth, and maybe some of yours too.